Affairs, there will be the presentation of the photo exhibition by TASS. Their Feet is Immortal, which is timed to the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War, that has been prepared with the use of the photo archive of the agency. At the opening ceremony, there will be the opening speech of the minister. There will also be representatives of the diplomatic corps accredited in Moscow, as well as representatives of the scientific community, the NGOs, and the mass media. The exhibition is dedicated to the key events of the last months of the Great Patriotic War. There are archived messages and archived materials from daily reports of the news of the front and the news of the Allied information, as well as footage of the military correspondent of the agency. And it's very important that this is the exhibition that takes place at the ministry, and it's not just a one-day event, but it's part of a larger exhibition marathon, which will take on and will be exhibited in embassies. It will be presented on different platforms, including the online format. So it's a large-scale project. On the same day, in the Cultural Center of the GLAF UPDK, there will be the presentation of the cultural, tourism, and historical representation of the Kaluga region. During the presentation, there will be presented the achievements of the region in the social economical development, as well as its unique cultural and historical heritage. Heads of diplomatic commissions, representatives of business structures, Russian and foreign mass media are invited to attend it. There are, of course, planned speeches from the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the governor of the Kaluga region, Vladislav Shapsha. On April 11th, the Minister of Foreign Affairs will participate in the first of this year meeting of the Council of Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the CIS states. Heads of foreign ministries will exchange their opinions on actual international and regional agenda topics, as well as discuss the priority directions of international cooperation in the Union this year. They will pay special attention to the preparation of the celebration of the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War, as well as other issues of cultural humanitarian cooperation and strengthening of border security. Minister will draw conclusion to the implementation of the plan of multi-level consultations in 2024, as well as the program of action on activizing partnership between the foreign ministries of the member states. After the meeting, all the results will be given to the heads of states and the governments of the member states. So this is the very busy agenda. Now for the relevant events, and perhaps I will repeat a lot of what has been said. On April the 2nd, we celebrated the Day of the Union of the Russian and Belarusian people. And this is the great event that celebrates the unity between two countries. And this is the symbol of the strong friendship and willpower to the unity between the friendly states. The telegrams were exchanged between the President of the Russian Federation, the Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and other high officials. This day was highly celebrated all over Russia and Belarus. A lot of events took place on April the 2nd in the capitals. In Moscow, there was the theater piece, the pathetic Journal of Memory. And in Minsk, there was the celebratory concert with the participation of the Russian choir of Mitrofan Patnitsky, as well as the Governor's Symphony Chapel of the Penza region. And all the participants of these events got to hear the message of the President of the Russian Federation, and in Minsk of the deputy head of the State Duma, of Mr. Abramchenko, about the history of this event and the achievements of the international cooperation within the Union state, was presented at the celebratory event in the embassy of the Belarus and Russian Federation on March 31st, and on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. And of course, from all of us, we send heartfelt wishes to all the citizens of Russia and Belarus on this great event. We wish subsequent development, strengthening of sovereignty and authority on the international stage, as well as flourishment, success, great health, happiness, well-being, as well as faith in themselves and their own powers, because together we can achieve anything. And that's the only key to our success. And now we move on to the situation that is obvious to us, but for many of those in the world minority, to them it's not as obvious. The situation around the Ukrainian crisis, the Kiev regime, country has lost its sense of self-preservation, and it's trying, no matter the price, to undermine. And before that, they tried to claim victory, to impose a defeat or whatever their wording was. But right now, they're desperately trying not to claim victory over someone, not to strengthen their own positions, but to undermine the Russian-American dialogue that has launched, using terrorist methods, striking energy infrastructure objects daily. Why am I paying special attention? Because starting on March 18th, it's starting on this date. It's in action the mutual moratorium on the strikes on the energy system. And starting on this day, supposedly, because it's not being followed by the Kiev regime, we see targeted attacks on the objects of the energy infrastructure of the Russian Federation, that despite the statements of the Ukrainian side about supposedly military necessity, are clearly of the provocative and demonstrative nature. Facts speak for themselves. Over this period, there was over 30 strikes against our objects of energy infrastructure in Belgorod, Bryansk, Zaporozhye region, in Krasnodar Krai, Kursk and Kherson regions. And it's important to point out that all those strikes have been launched using Western weapons that are used for terrorist attacks against our civilian infrastructure. Just a few examples. For those who continue to live under the illusions, so they could get a real picture, on March 31st, 10:08 a.m. in Zaporozhye region, after the attack of the Ukrainian UAV, there were at least 4 UAV launches against the electrical station in Novogorivsk. This is the Guptavia Energo. There was an electric cut of the home users in the 2 residential villages in the Tokmakovsk region. At the same day, at 11:38 in Belgorod region, after the strike of Ukrainian UAV against the transformatory station in Smorodina, a high voltage line has been cut, with electricity cut for over 1,200 consumers in the Grivoronsk region. On April the 2nd, the Ukrainian armed forces used UAV to strike the gas station Svatova in LPR, and the Kiev region, feeling their coming defeat, trying at any price to provoke an escalation and to attract their British and European patrons in a direct confrontation with Russia. And obviously they have no result. As the Russian Ministry of Defense points out, all the objects are securely protected. There is no threat to the population. That's the idea of the Kiev regime, not to cause direct damage, but create new pretext for another wave of hysteria in Western mass media and try to undermine undermine the dialogue that has already started between Moscow and Washington. So the actions of the Kiev regime are not just war crimes, but it's a deliberate course to undermine any peaceful initiatives. Just take a look. Over the last 3 years, they've tried everything, and I don't just mean the Minsk agreements that we tried to get from the Kiev regime over 7 years, but even over the last 3 years, even direct negotiations with the representatives of Bankova, despite how obvious it was at the moment that chance was used. Direct negotiations did take place. They took place, they lasted for several rounds. There were also numerous statements, regular statements of Moscow. As for the diplomatic settlement is our preferred way of action. There were also constant reminders of the Russian Federation that the Kiev regime has prohibited themselves having any negotiations with our side. We've tried everything. And whereas in the West, as if under the order that only in the battlefield a solution could be found and this issue, this crisis could be settled, when they understood that that which they bet on of the victory of the Kiev regime will never see the light of day. That's when they've changed their tune, tried to talk about the peaceful negotiations. The Kiev regime did, once again, everything in their power to undermine them at the stage of the idea and up to the point of any kind of realization, and even any reassurances that were given by Zelensky. As for them following this condition, that has been undermined on the exact same day. Russia will not fall prey to any provocations, but responsibility for the consequences of this destructive policy will be fully on Bankova and their mentors, who continue to follow the craziest criminal actions of the Bankova. I would like to say a few more words around the Ukrainian crisis. The Kiev regime, as we've already mentioned, contrary to the commitments it has made, is still striking our energy infrastructure. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, from March 26th to 31st this year, the targets of the AFU's artillery and drones were the facilities of Rossetti Center in the Bryansk, Belgorod, and Kursk region, an electric substation in the Zaporozhye region, ground equipment in the Glebovsky underground gas storage facility in Crimea, the Saratov oil refinery, etc. Among the targets, they already include the gas metering equipment and the Suja gas metering station in the Kursk region. After the attack of the Ukrainian Armed Forces on March 28th this year was destroyed. On April the 2nd, the AFU launched a drone strike on the Svatova gas distribution station in the LPR. So we're providing factual information that showcases how the Kiev regime is undermining exactly what it publicly agreed to, the moratorium on launching strikes on the energy civil infrastructure. We would like to emphasize once again that the continuing terror of the Kiev regime against the Russian energy sector only confirms its lack of commitment. Bankova lacks the political will for peace. They're still determined to escalate the conflict and are ready to any provocation to undermine efforts to achieve any settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. And this is not the only crime. Against the background of renewed dialogue between Moscow and Washington, the Kiev regime, with the support of its so-called European partners, is not reducing the intensity of strikes against civilian facilities on Russian territory.
The number of attacks against civilian population of the country does not decrease. Since March 24th to March 30th, 118 civilians have been targeted by attacks. 14 of them died, 104 were injured, including 3 minors. The majority of those affected have been in the territory of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics and the Kherson region. At this period, in Horlovka, for example, the Ukrainian strike resulted in the injuries of the TV channel in Donetsk. In the DPR in Lysychansk, a 14-year boy was injured during a strike from the multiple launch missile system in the village of Mikhailovka. A female doctor and a driver of the ambulance have been attacked in the village of Petrovka. And also in Gorlovka, a 13-year-old boy and 4 other civilians were attacked with cluster munitions. And on the 1st of April, the AFU attacked a regular bus with passengers at Victory Square and at the center of the city. 16 people were injured. An 86-year-old woman died as a result of a UAV strike against a civilian house in the Verkhnya Krynica village on the Zaporozhye region. The Rostov region was attacked from air on April 2nd. As a result of this, a house in Taganrog was damaged and 1 person was injured. In the Kursk region, the retreating Ukrainian Nazis in their impotent rage are attacking the civilians with UAVs. We see new facts of deliberate mining of the locations adjoining the civilian areas. We see that we heard some news that Ukrainian militants in Suja offered locals bread, and then in cold blood they murdered those civilians. We find new victims in wells, in gardens, houses, and cars, but it's not all, it's not everything. The Ukrainian Nazis are profiting of this. Just to think of it, you cannot stoop any lower. But of course, there is always potential for more depravity. We see some auctions or selling stuff that was stolen from the civilians in the Kursk region. They are selling goods that has been stolen from the region. They've been marauding the Russian region, and the AFU militants resorted to every means possible. The Kazachya Lokne village in the Kursk region saw the fact that the locals were not allowed to bury their loved ones, whose bodies were strewn across the streets, until they got the information that the Western journalists were having to visit the village. Then the remains were cleared out with shovels. Another evidence of the participation of foreign mercenaries in combats in the border region in Kursk was the discovery of a corpse of one of the bandits with an insignia of a British Marine school called Gornestown Sail Training. It's a wonderful advertisement for this facility. We see such insignia being issued to the alumni of this educational establishment, numbering among their alumni such personalities as Prince Philip and King Charles III. We are not seeing any reaction from the Western NGOs and media outlets who were running with the pictures of boys and girls claiming that there was human rights violations in some corners of the world. Where are all the NGOs from the Western Europe? Where are they? It's our common living space. It's our continent where neo-Nazis are massacring the civilian population. All those NGOs and media are silent. They are worthless. But our law enforcement agencies are continuing their work. The Russian courts are continuing to sentence the Russian criminals for the war crimes they've committed. 23 militants of the terrorist organization Azov Battalion were sentenced to prison. 6 militants of the 129 separate Brigade of the Territorial Defense of the AFU, Sergei Blashenko and Sergei Bohonko, received 15 years each. Nikolai Koronenko, Artur Volkov, and Maxim Hadzev received 14 years, and Vitaly Chupin received 13 years in prison. The mercenaries from the UK, France, and Georgia, Good Fraser Owen, Arthur Tremoulet, and Nicholas Cheredze, who were fighting for the AFU, have been sentenced in absentia to 14 years in prison each. The Soldier of Fortune for the United States have been also sentenced. Robert Anthony Vardaro was sentenced to 7 years in prison. They have been all called. A search was called for them internationally. And also, this concerns the case of a legionnaire from Brazil, Nicolas Cha. The Britons and the EU functionaries continue to try to consolidate Europe's position in support of Ukraine. The March 27th European Summit, uniting countries joining the coalition of the willing, was organized to serve this goal. This coalition was organized by London a month ago to form a so-called peacekeeping contingent to be sent to Ukraine. But we see that probably this whole operation has come to a dead end. President Macron of France has declared of the creation of the Coalition for Action for Sustainable and Durable Peace, which intends to reunify those who demonstrated their willingness to express unity in building the peace through force. In other words, the same coalition of willing supports the continuation of war, but under another disguise. I have an impression that those names of some groups and social networks with some questionable content for people with some problems with mental problems, they have nothing to do with peace and peace efforts. Those are the breeding grounds for the group of the war party that tried to inflict a strategic defeat upon Russia, as they said themselves. Now, understanding that they have failed in the task, they are trying to create some sort of plan, and they are creating and multiplying the corresponding organizations. We also see reports that the German parliament has prepared a legal framework for increasing military aid to Kiev in 2025 by 3 billion euros. I just wanted to ask them the question if they were aware of the situation with the economy in Europe. I wonder whether they know whether the financial circles and the business circles have been fleeing Germany for the longest time, bound for Asia or the United States to shelter from this economic collapse of Germany, and they are still continuing, the authorities in Germany are still continuing to pump more money to Kiev. Paris is intending to ship an additional package of French fighters Mirage 2000 to Kiev and give them another 2 billion euros in military aid, including the missiles for the fighters and the ATGMs and armored cars, wheeled tanks, etc. There's an expression, at least we die with music, and the money that they send for the music that is playing along the process of the death of the European continent. The Scandinavian countries are trying to match the southern neighbors. For example, Sweden has announced the biggest shipment and package of aid, numbering around $1.6 billion. The aforementioned summit in Paris also featured discussions of the Franco-Briton initiative of deployment of some guarantee forces in Ukraine, and not a peacekeeping contingent. I have an impression that all this is required just to completely fool their own citizens, and the European Union or United Kingdom to completely baffle them by introducing new notions and new organizations and new plans. And the forces that they're planning to deploy in Ukraine will not be deployed in the territory of the line of contact and will not be replacing the AFU. Their idea behind the deployment is to protect the strategic points such as Odessa or Lvov, and that's been openly discovered from the statements in Paris and London. I have an impression that the Europeans are trying to protect the cities and have their own plans for them. This reminds me of the military intervention of Entente's force during the civil war in our country in 1917-1922. But we know our history well. And of course, the terrible history of the mobilization of Ukraine, the corruption and the arbitrary actions of the military commissariats was mentioned even by the Ukrainian ombudsman Dmitry Lubinets, who admitted the massive and systemic character of human rights violations and abuse of power. We see facts of use of force, weapons, and special equipment against those mobilized, and forced signature of documents, barring lawyers access to the defendants, and the victims of the bussification, this verb, this noun meaning the forced packing of people into buses. Now we see that now ordinary bandits have taken the place of lawyers, and they are extorting money to save people from this trap. That's where the billions of dollars will go, billions of euros too. We see that the help you, help me attitude, that where the Kiev functionaries are continuing to drink the blood of ordinary Ukrainians and are still continuing to profit off the aid of the European Union. The facts are confirming the relevance of the special military operation whose goals will be accomplished, as was mentioned numerous occasions by leadership. Just see what happens around the destruction, not just the freedom of religious expression, that is a notion long gone in Ukraine, but around the destruction of Christianity in Ukraine. Last week, the fight for the appropriation of the Kiev Peshers Lavra and its property and relics has resumed with new force. On the 5th of March, the Ministry of Culture for Ukraine, if we can call it a Ministry of Culture, based on executive order, has created a commission. One would think it would be to protect this heritage site, or just to create a dialogue. One would think that this would be the goal of the commission, but no. In the best practices, in the best traditions, the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine, based on executive order, created the commission to, quote, inventorize and verify the availability of the remains of saints in the caves of the Lavra. Remember what the initiatives of Zelensky were regarding the settlement of the questions related to the Lavra. They called it decommunization. But no, even communists couldn't even come up with such an idea 100 years ago. There have been a lot of things done wrong, and we admit that, and we are speaking openly about that, but no one didn't even dare to do that, not even the most odious ones. The composition of the Commission on this verification of the historical and scientific value of the remains of saints, that's a direct quote, namely. This Commission included the Doctor of Veterinary Sciences and it's just hard to hear it. A doctor of veterinarian sciences, the dean in the biomorphology department of vertebrates of the National University of Bioresources and Use of Nature of Ukraine, Oleg Melnik, was appointed as one of the members of the commission. Well, Nikolai Gogol, Saltykov-Shchedrin, Bulgakov or Zoshenko, all those authors, perhaps Shukhin too, would envy such a charade. And the number of experts that, together with the aforementioned person, have been taking part in the sacrilege, counted the numbers. The dean of the Department of Human Anatomy of the Odessa Medical University, Elena Apelhans, the professor of the Department of Anatomy of the Vinnytsia University, Yuri Guminsky, they just know and we should know the anti-heroes of the situation. According to the document, the Commission should verify the existence of the remains of saints in the tombs in the caves of the National Reserve of the Kiev Pechers Lavra until May 30th, and to evaluate their historical and scientific value. In case of discovery of new items in the category of cultural values, they should be included in a special list for further reporting. The Commission started its work on the morning of 20th of March, where the territory of the caves was breached by the members of the Commission, accompanied by the members of the law enforcement agencies. And they were planning to open up the caskets with the remains, to recount them and use samples for DNA expertise. How's that decommunization going for you? And the members of the staff arrive with instruments to break the locks separating the caves. I don't know what stage this work is currently happening at, because the information was classified, introducing the special security clearance to all information related to this. What are those heritage items, heritage pieces that should be hidden from their own populace? They are hiding also the fact that every normal person, the things that every normal person would call sacrilege. We see this as a basic start of the planned ravaging and destruction of valuable items that are especially valuable for all Orthodox and Christian world. And 3 years ago, those relics have been started to be shipped out of the Kiev Pechers Lavra by the regime of Zelensky, and those relics were then sent to unknown destinations in Western countries. We see that Kiev is demonstrating that the neo-Nazi dictature has been oppressing the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church, has been stolen from now. It's not even getting into the pockets of the Ukrainian people now. They have been stealing the soul from the Ukrainian people by doing this. This act of blasphemy shouldn't be left without any attention from the international community. The relics of the saints are not museum exposition pieces. Definitely, certainly not an object for experimentation. I allow myself to quote the American lawyer Robert Amsterdam, who publicly stated the following. He counted the current actions as the state-sponsored desecration of the place that has been a spiritual center for almost a millennia. He pointed out that the raids organized by the government are a direct violation of the Ukrainian legislation and the norms of international law, representing, and I quote, alarming return to the tactics of religious persecution of the Soviet era. Once again, I would like to ask, how is the decommunization going? If we use international legal framework, then the UNESCO Convention on the Protection of the World Cultural and Environmental Heritage of 1972 talks about the commitment of states to assist in the recognition, protection, preservation, popularization of the cultural and environmental heritage. There shouldn't be any actions, and I quote, that could harm directly or indirectly cultural and environmental heritage. As we see, the Kiev Pecharsk Lavra is among the list of the place of heritage of worldwide heritage of UNESCO. There are corresponding protective verification, protective certificates that still exist, which wouldn't allow people to dehumanize and to act in such a dehumanizing manner. We have already provided them our moral evaluation, and it's not in favor of those who are trying to destroy the cultural and religious heritage of the canonical orthodoxy.
And of course, about another masquerade that is being prepared by the West, the history of Bucha. This year marks the 3rd anniversary of the neo-Nazi regime of Zelensky and its curator organizing the provocation in order to blame Russia for the war crimes against the civilians in Bucha. And we've repeatedly stated, using the facts, that the so-called massacre in Bucha is nothing but a staged effect, but Bankova and its curators do not give up any efforts to lay the blame on Russia for the bloody spectacle that they have orchestrated, doing anything in their power to discredit our country in the international information space. But that's not even their main goal. The main goal is to blow smoke under those who they're trying to attract into these bloody acts, those who they're trying to forcefully mobilize. This is where it's necessary. I would like to recall that in 1944, Nazis also blamed the Red Army for the so-called crimes against the civilian population after leaving the city Nemmersdorf. Later, historians have recognized this as the factual lie in order to present the Soviet soldiers in an unpleasant light. And today, on the same principles, they're trying to blame the Russian army for the so-called crimes in Bucha. Over 3 years, Russia has not been presented with a list of the victims in Bucha, although we've sent requests for identifying of those whose bodies were shown all over the world. In particular, since 2022, we have addressed to several UN structures in order to get from the Ukrainian side this list. On September 22nd, 2022, during the meeting of the Security Council of the UN, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lavrov, has addressed the subsequent demand to the Secretary General of the UN. And then the minister repeatedly reminded Mr. Guterres about his request during personal meetings, during the phone calls, as well as making it public. In September 2024, the permanent representation of Russia in New York have passed over to the UN structure that prepared by the investigative committee on investigating by the Prosecutor General's office the request on the provocation in Bucha. And we've repeatedly called on the UN Secretariat to reply to this request, and still it remains without an answer. Let's take a look at what exactly could help those at UN and anyone actually establish what happened then. Let's draw the lines of what doesn't add up. First, how could, as they state, bodies of those killed in the last days of February and the first days of March, as they state, how could those bodies remain unnoticed until early April? And their version operates on the fact that mass shootings of the civilians were perpetrated by the Russian militants in the first days after the city was captured. And I would like to say that Bucha was partially occupied by the Russian army at the end of February 2022. And the rest were in the beginning of March. And all those footage of evidence are referring to April. And yet you can see that there is no evidence of desiccating bodies. There is no damage to the bodies. There is no damage by animals. So remaining in this state unchanged until the spring of 22 would be impossible. When, where, and by whom were those crimes perpetrated? The modern criminology means, as well as the medical expertise, allow us to state the place of murder using the criminology artifacts, the remains of substances under the nails, the nature of worn-out clothes, as well as molecular traces. As for the evidence, as for when and where were these people killed, by whom, and they're being presented as the victims of Bucha, are nowhere to be found. And yet they're still saying that the Russian soldiers are to blame for it, and there's nothing to back this theory. Third, and this is the question that comes from the last one, when were these bodies brought from and for what purpose? If they were killed by the militants of the Kiev regime before, where were they preserved all this time? Medical expertise could help establish if those bodies were frozen or if they were brought to the city abandoned by the Russian army after a few hours. This could also be backed by the lack of blood traces. Why between the messages of Russian troops leaving Bucha and the first evidence? Why were there 2-3 days between that? Russian army left Bucha on March 30th, some of them on March 31st. On the same day, the mayor of Bucha, Anatoly Fedoruk, has presented from the city. After that, the public deputy, Jan Belenuk, has presented it. If at least one of them saw on the central street, Yablonsky, all those bodies, the footage of which were spread across the Western mass media, I highly doubt they would stay silent about it. It would be one of the first things they were speaking about this fact. I would like to recall that only on April 1st, the 2nd, there were first reports on the shocking war crimes that took place in the city. But the answer is clear. Nothing of what the Western mass media tried to spread, nothing actually had taken place. Because otherwise, any representatives of the leadership giving commentary after Russian forces left the city, they would be describing it in detail, crying about it. And they would be right if those were their compatriots, their citizens, those they knew personally, if they live in that city, because they had to know those people. They would be quoting words of their families. They would know them by names. They would be sharing their stories. None of that was done. Not during the recording of the video message of the mayor of Bucha, nor afterwards. None of the aforementioned was even said out loud. What was the national police doing in the town on the morning of 2nd of April? According to the official statements, national police, Bucha, tried to cleanse the town from all the diversions and all the complacence of Russia. But after that, the authorities stay silent about the fact. And finally, why most victims were wearing white stripes on their arms, on their hands. And in March 2022, most residents of the Kiev region, those who welcomed the Russian army, would like to present their peaceful intentions were wearing the white stripes, and the fact that most who died in Bucha had white stripes on their elbows. Some of them had their hands tied behind their backs. It speaks for the fact that it's the Ukrainian armed forces who tried to get rid of them after they entered Bucha. As for the quick exit of the Russian troops, a lot of them didn't have time to take them off, and after that the territorial defense troops or the national police just shot those people point blank for trying to defend peace. There are a lot of other questions that could be asked. Why were there staged photographs being spread on social media? A lot of victims later turned out to be alive, and photographs of their bodies that were trying to be presented as dead bodies were spread during the first days of hysteria and later proved to be fake. Why was there no assessment of the possibility that at least some of the bodies, victims of the shelling of the Ukrainian armed forces that was conducted after Russian armed forces left the city, this version just didn't align with the narrative that the Westerners love so much. And they're not even considering this option, even though on those photos you see the traces of the strikes of the Kiev regime artillery. An important question that a lot of people are asking, that Russian militants opened humanitarian corridors in Bucha in order to let the civilians leave. That was confirmed by several witness statements of the citizens. So why did the potential victims, if they felt this threat, why did they not use those corridors? And perhaps the final question, the question that the Western journalists should ask themselves. Foreign mercenaries, including Philip Seman, who was found guilty of maraudery in Prague, have openly admitted that they, including Seman, under the AFU control, took part in crimes against civilians in March-April 2022. So why did his statement get ignored as proof that Ukrainian armed forces tried to kill people in Bucha by using even other hands to do it? So everything that we're witnessing is another spectacle. And why is it being put to action right now? In order to pump this information into those civilians of Ukraine who continue to believe the Kiev regime. And once again, in order to provide this zombie information to the European citizens whose pockets they're raiding for the last remnants of billion to support the Kiev regime. This is what they need them for. And back then it was necessary to undermine the peaceful negotiations, peaceful agreements, in order to lead the region to the brink of battle. And right now, to undermine any negotiations pertaining to peace. And right now, to ensure multi-billion financing into Bankova. And let's take a look. What an interesting take. And how interesting they can blow out the information noise. And how interesting they're using the silence for similar scenarios, terrorist acts. And in the first case, this was a made-up case. And in the second case, there's a real case, the explosion in the Nord Streams. And it's been over 2.5 years since the terrorist acts on the objects. And so much time since this civilian energy project will be destroyed. Do you think any result has been achieved? Of course not. Dead silence. Meanwhile, they're putting up plays when it comes to Bucha. Let me recall the chronological order of events. On the night of 26th of September 2022, there was the lower pressure on one of the two streams of the Nord Stream 2. Immediately, they notified the border services of Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. Then we found out the event took place in the economical zone of Denmark, and the Swedish seismologists have noted on the 26th of September 2 explosions on the pipelines, and the Danish Energy Agency has reported that a lot of gas has reached the sea. After that, the Swedish Agency on Preserving the Environment has stated that about 5.8 million tons of malicious substances have been found in the atmosphere. On the 28th of September 2022, the Russian General Prosecutor's Office has started the class actions on the case of international terrorism. On the 30th of September 2022, the President of Russia has stated that the explosion is a diversion aimed at the destruction of the common European energy infrastructure. Germany, Denmark, and Sweden have stated their intention on conducting national investigation on the blowing up of the gas pipelines, but refused to include our country. In mid-October 2022, European mass media have published first photographs taken underwater of the blown pipeline. A month later, specialists of Gazprom and Nord Stream 2 AG representatives were allowed to take a look at those. On November 18, 2022, the fact of diversion was confirmed by Swedish special services. They even found remnants of the explosive devices. On February 8, 2023, the American journalist, who is the award recipient of the Pulitzer Prize, Seymour Hersh, who specializes in investigations, stated that the explosives were laid in June 2022 under the guise of the NATO training, Baltics 2022. The representatives of the military Navy forces of the U.S. And according to this data, this operation was overseen by the President of the U.S., Joe Biden. In the European Commission press service, they've called these conclusions as nothing but speculations and refused to comment on them. The coordinator on strategic communications in the Council of National Security of the White House, John Kirby, stated that there is not a semblance of truth in this article and stated that the U.S. is not responsible for those explosions. And he did not go into detail as for the Joe Biden's involvement. On February 21st, 2023, at Russia's request, the UN Security Council had a meeting devoted to the explosion on the gas pipelines. But the Russian project of resolution that proposed an international investigation under the guise of the UN Secretary General, but the Westerners blocked that project. On March 1st, 2nd, 2023, at the meeting of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the G20 in the Russian and Chinese side, tried to include in the final declaration mention of the explosions in the North Streams. But once again, the Western states have refused these initiatives. On March 7th, 2023, the New York Times newspapers, stating the American officials stated that diversifications at the pipelines could be conducted by the pro-Ukrainian grouping that acted without the knowledge of the Ukrainian authorities. So where exactly does Joe Biden's statement on the destruction of civilian infrastructure fit into this, of the civilian infrastructure object, which he publicly spoke about in the early 22? And the edition D side also had a publication that the German investigators have located a ship that was used by the diversion, and the company that allocated it belonged to the citizens of Ukraine and was registered in Poland. And we all remember this miraculous story about the luxurious yacht that was tried to be posed by the Western mass media as the main version of events. And on March 8, 2023, the Times newspaper informed that European intelligence services know the name of a private sponsor of the diversification. Of course, they did not state exactly who it was, but supposedly it was a rich Ukrainian who has nothing to do with Zelensky or his regime. On March 27, 2023, the UN Security Council did not support the resolution of the international investigation on the Nord Stream diversification. Of course, once again, it was initiated by Russia and China. In favor of the resolution voted 3 countries, Russia, China, and Brazil. Against, there were no votes, and 12 have abstained. And thus, the resolution did not get enough votes in order to be adopted. And of course, Westerners were behind it.
7th of February 2024, the Prosecutor's Office of Sweden informed that they were stopping the investigation on the explosions in the Nord Stream. And I quote that the preliminary investigation reached such a stage where the authorities have a clear understanding of the incidents, and we haven't detected anything that could point to the fact that Sweden or Swedish citizens have been connected to the attack that happened in international waters. And the prosecutor closed the Swedish investigation of the sabotage in Nord Stream. The investigation arrived to the conclusion that the Swedish jurisdiction does not extend to the terrorist act, and that's why the investigation should be closed. Not a single diplomat from the Western countries or from the US. It's because the US President Joe Biden said that the Nord Stream would be destroyed. It wasn't mentioned in the investigation. On February 26, 2024, the Danish police has concluded the investigation of explosions in the gas pipeline due to the lack of grounds to establish a criminal investigation. Just imagine, it was in the zone adjacent to the territorial exclusive economic zone, and the attack resulted in the damage to the environment and the expulsion of noxious gas from the water. Just the end users suffered, of course, the ordinary citizens suffered, but there were no grounds to continue the investigation. And they said that the authorities could come to the conclusion that there was deliberate sabotage at the pipeline. However, there have been not enough grounds to establish a criminal investigation. On 15th of September 2024, the Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, said that they wanted to reach accountability in Germany for those who had done it if they were caught. You can count on that, in a quote. He called the sabotage a terrorist attack and called on the law enforcement and the Prosecutor General to conduct an investigation without paying attention to the interests of any other party. It's in a surprising metamorphosis. The continent that grew accustomed to being worried about the climate threat due to the discarded plastic. Just remember the numerous acts by Greta Thunberg. The same continent demonstratively didn't notice the terrorist attack against their own energy security. Where were the resolutions? Where were the emergency sessions? Where were the emergency meetings? Where was the unanimous denunciation of when it comes to the geopolitical rivals? Instead of the investigation, we saw just dead silence. Instead of the demands for an answer, there have been ritual dances around the thesis that nothing pointed to the fact that this or that country of Europe or its citizens have been culpable of this attack, as if those gas pipelines that have been supplying Europe with LNG for decades just burned themselves out of the excess patriotism. Convenient, isn't it? It's convenient when it's such a disgrace. A terrible attack that costed so much to Europeans could be cost could be completely exempt from the agenda. And we're not talking about just an explosion at the pipelines. We saw the probable explosion of any traditions and efforts to protect the environment. We saw probable explosions of the collective sovereignty of the countries of Europe and the West. But would the collective West notice this terrible irony? The Western media are ready to parrot the information on some leakage or to make up stories about some Soviet or Russian submarine surfacing in the middle of that city, some sea cables being damaged, and now with the Nord Stream situation, they've just turned away from the truth and something that had tremendous consequences. The Western politicians that have been juggling tolerance and the common human values and diversity, new ethics, prefer not to remember the methane discharge equivalent to a year's worth of emissions from cars. Why is that? Maybe it's because the true puppet masters behind this attack that who tried to turn Europe into a hostage of LNG, or if the admission of guilt in the act of sabotage would surface the powerlessness of them. While we see it, while we see this inaction, this helplessness on the part of Western Europe, we are demanding a response. We understand that Brussels will not react to our demands, it will not do that, but we will continue this work. I would like to remind you that at the end of January, the authorities of Denmark issued the Nord Stream 2 AG permission to work to conserve the damaged pipeline stretch. The work should begin on April 1st, and the operator will need to report on their plan of action with the pipeline, including with the severed fragments of the pipe, which will be laid on the seafloor. The Agency of Energy in Denmark underlined that the goal of this work is to minimize risk for environment and to prevent the expulsion of further gas from the pipeline and the egress of seawater, which is rich in oxygen. During the conservation efforts, the both ends of the pipeline will be provided with the corks that will be and the deformed parts will be cut off. It's a surprising speed of action. Suddenly, we are just seeing a theatrical kind of their judicious manner that they are doing it. And we have called on the authorities in European countries, in Germany, for example, insisting on the participation of Russian competent authorities in the investigation conducted by Germany to ensure its transparency and openness, and all our requests on legal aid on this crime were left without response by Germany. I just wanted to ask to the German media, aren't you wondering about the situation because the well-being of Germany was put at stake? Aren't you wondering about the situation with the investigation? There have been no exact results of the German investigation since the terrorist attack, and the circumstances have not been discovered. Germany and Poland were not even able to detain the suspect, which managed to lose their track in Ukraine. We can but question how sincere are the efforts of Germany to conduct this investigation. Is Germany independent in adopting their decisions on conducting investigations? The answers are obvious. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Lavrov, was asked during his interview to Channel 1 regarding the interest that perhaps Europe could have in restoring its energy supply. He responded that Europe and businesses in Europe have been paying for energy several times more than the American businesses. And people like Robert Habeck, Ursula von der Leyen, and Boris Pistorius, they all say that they will not be allowing the Nord Stream to be restored. Those are either sick people or suicidal people. Just remember that. One more topic worthy of mention, I would like to point to the troubling situation with the human rights in some Baltic countries. Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia have turned into reactionary police states, choosing caveman Russophobia as the ruling policy of their nationalist regimes. We see commonplace persecution of those who have been accused of thinking in a wrong manner, the criminal prosecution on made-up cases. Prosecutors and courts have been turned into obedient executors of the punitive justice in the countries of the Baltic. The most grave situation has been noticed in Latvia, where they make up accusations and are detaining people at will. Namely, we see the detention of the arrest of the prominent scientist and human rights defender Alexander Gaponenko. He is threatened with 20 years in prison. The Permanent Commission on International Cooperation in the human rights area within the Council of the President of the Russian Federation on Development of the Civil Society and Human Rights has sent a statement to the international structures and the High Commission of UN High Commission on Human Rights and the High Commission of the OSCE on the National Minorities Affairs, calling on them to interfere in the situation regarding the illicit arrest of Alexander Gaponenko. Also, among those who have been subjected to criminal persecution on politicized cases are the ex-deputy of the European Parliament, Tatiana Zhdanok, our compatriots Tatiana Andriets, Irina Kreli, Sergei Sidorov, Svetlana Nikolaeva. One of the most odious examples of lawlessness in Lithuania was the court process over the prominent politician and anti-fascist Algirdas Paleckis. The term of his sentencing was increased by 1 year, 10 months for some perjury against the members of the Forest Brothers gang that was celebrated as national heroes in Lithuania. He was initially imprisoned for his independent investigation of the events of 13th January 1991 in Vilnius. I remind you that at the state, the column of peaceful protesters were shot at by unknown snipers. This investigation could unveil the truth on the culpability of the ruling Lithuanian elite in this tragedy. In 2023, the authorities of Lithuania was liquidated and eliminated the Association of National Forum of Good Neighborliness, which supported the normalization of relations between Vilnius and Moscow and Minsk, and there have been some criminal cases investigated. In Estonia, the things are not better, and our compatriots Andrei Dronov, Sergei Seredenko, have been criminally persecuted. They have been made up criminal cases regarding the representative of independent media, such as Svetlana Burtseva, Alan Hansam, and others. Russia will continue to insist on the palpable reaction of relevant international organizations regarding this legal lawlessness in the countries of the Baltics, which only gathers momentum. We will continue to monitor the situation. Situation in Myanmar. As you know, on March 28, the Republic of Union of Myanmar witnessed the most powerful earthquake in the last 95 years, around 7.7 on the Richter scale, which caused destruction of infrastructure and social facilities, and Thailand also was affected by this earthquake, primarily Bangkok. And the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, Deputy Chair of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev, and the leadership of the State Duma of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation sent their condolences to the Myanmar people. Currently, we have information that around 3,000 people died in Myanmar. There are a lot of people missing. In the neighboring Thailand, there have been 18 casualties, 33 people were injured. According to our embassy in Yangon, in There is one Russian casualty in Mandalay in Myanmar. Currently, our diplomats are establishing the circumstances of the event. On the order of the Russian President Vladimir Putin, 5 Il-76 planes were sent to Myanmar to help the friendly Myanmar people on 29th of March and 31st of March. And we had a joint task force numbering 264 people to arrive to Myanmar, numbering in cynologists and canine specialists, anesthesiologists and psychologists. Specialists also brought with them necessary equipment to conduct search and rescue operations. In some mostly affected areas, including the city of Mandalay, where there are some heritage sites, of course, of the Buddhist culture, our EMERCOM rescuers conducted their first operation on March 30th. In the same region, the Federal Center of Catastrophe Medicine of the Russian Ministry of Health has deployed a mobile hospital which includes reanimation, therapeutic and other blocks, and also we have started qualified aid on April 1st. I would like to express my condolences on behalf of Minister of Foreign Affairs, and we confirm our solidarity with the friendly people of Myanmar, and we are ready to provide all necessary aid to overcome the consequences of this natural disaster. On March 29th, in La Spezia, in Liguria, in Italy, in the city library, there was a presentation of the collection of articles called The True Root Causes Behind the Russian-Ukrainian Conflict. A presentation of a book is just an ordinary event, one would think, provided its content doesn't violate the legislation. However, in Italy, there have been true drama surrounding this publication, worthy of Shakespeare. The Ukrainian diaspora in Italy and some members of the Italian establishment did everything in their power not to allow the presentation to happen. Perhaps we're talking about something good there, if they went to all those lengths to prevent the presentation. The organizers and the municipal authorities reflected example of a civil valor, and the event took place. I would like to thank all those concerned citizens who showed the example of commitment to the freedom of speech and fought those who stopped distinguishing truth from lies and democracy from dictature. The presentation was a huge success. This confirms the fact that Italy still has a huge popular demand for truth regarding the situation in Ukraine. It's much stronger, stronger than any external bans and marginalized anger. Some words on the book that was published. It was issued in October 2024 by the Italian publishing house Visione Editore, and was sponsored by the leader of Italian Party of the Sovereign Popular Democracy, Francesco Toscano, and it was focused around the article of the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, regarding the historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians, published on the 12th of July 2021. The book was presented in the residency of the Russian ambassador in Italy in October 2024. It was presented to Italian public in Trieste, Reggio di Calabria, Reggio Emilia, in Rome, Trento, and Genoa. Unfortunately, Italy still witnesses censorship efforts and infringement upon the freedom of the speech. One of the recent events is the ban of the broadcast of a documentary Maidan Turned Towards the War, presented by RT. The organizers of the broadcast protested this act of censorship at the city square in Torino, and they were chanting the slogan, "Where is our democracy?" towards the Italian authorities. I think that the Italians that have the opportunity to read for themselves will be able to familiarize themselves with the book and make the corresponding conclusions. And some news of infinity, new facts of Canada sheltering the Nazi Ukrainian criminals. We monitor the history around the attempts of the attempts of researchers and Jewish popular organizations to reach the act of declassifying the archives of the so-called Commission of Jules Deschanel, which in 1980s investigated the biographies of 100 accomplices and of Nazi Germany, which were accused of war crimes during the Great Patriotic War. And we had a list, that was acquired by a team of American historians that was previously preserved in the Canadian Library and Archive Service. And this is one of the variants of the register, which was created by the Royal Mounted Police in Canada. And Gerald McBride, presiding over the group, hasn't published the list. They mentioned that it numbered 774 accomplices of Adolf Hitler. They mentioned in detail those who have been the prominent members of us, one of the initiators of the creation of the 14th SS Galician Division of the German Armed Forces, Vladimir Kubiovich, and a operative squad member from the SS-10A unit, Helmut Oberlander, which were culpable of mass murder of children in 1942-1943 in Krasnodar region. This once again reminds us that the Canadian authorities have been helping Nazi collaborators and accomplices to enter the country, including those who have been culpable of Holocaust. They have not even been accused of their crimes, but they were received support and mentorship. As a true act of glorification of Nazism and intent to rewrite history, we saw the welcoming of a member of Yaroslav Honko, member of the LCS Galician Division in the Canadian Parliament in September 2024. The official Canadian authorities did not deport this war criminal, and they refused Russia to extradite other criminals, namely Vladimir Katruk and Helmut Oberlander.
And recently, the Canadian ambassador in Russia, Sarah Taylor, made herself known as well, where she used the Russophobic commentaries after laying flowers at the monument of the patriotic mother at the Biskarov graveyard in St. Petersburg. Canadians received a strong démarche and pointed out that these actions are absolutely unacceptable, who tried to
Это вообще ни в какие рамки не влезает. Это не то, что неуместно, это кощунственно, это преступно и аморально в преддверии празднования 80-летия Победы с учетом боевого братства наших стран в составе антигитлеровской коалиции. Она не только в отношении нашей страны и нашего народа проявила кощунственное незнание истории, она своим же канадским ветеранам плюнула не в лицо, их уже многих нет, а им, ушедшим в спины. Она осквернила память, в первую очередь, своих канадских ветеранов. Они не имеют возможности ей ответить, но за них это сделаем мы. Мы уверены, что спустя какое-то время перечень укрывавшихся в Канаде после Второй мировой войны нацистских преступников станет достоянием широкой общественности.
of Culture of Russia and China 2024-2024. The exposition is dedicated to such an important part of human culture as gastronomical traditions. And food for Chinese is not just a way to meet your basic demands. It's also another way to strengthen friendly relations. It's also a source of inspiration in many areas of art. There will be exhibition objects from the collections of one of the largest and most visited museums of the world, the National Museum of China. There will be Greatest China, several fabrics. This will allow people to see China as a country of great riches. You will see the ancient culinary techniques, as well as see the evolution of the kitchen cutlery. See how rich the Chinese gastronomy is. And there is another section of the exhibition is dedicated to the main drinks in China. Tea and wine, traditions of their consumption go back more than a millennia. And the link to this event will also be mentioned in the text version of the briefing. Now I'm ready to answer your question. Is the international life with us? Yes. Good afternoon. You've just mentioned Bucha, but recently Zelensky gathered representatives of high-ranking European states and made a statement that Russia committed on the Ukrainian territory over 180,000 war crimes. How could you comment this statement? It's another nonsense of a sick mind. But it's also the kind of nonsense that is also fed further on by the propaganda cannon. What we've seen, what we've heard, we've already proved it wrong, and we've especially spoken in detail about Bucha. We see and hear horrible fakes from the Kiev regime, supposedly about 20,000 Ukrainian kids stolen by Russia. I won't even mention this informational garbage because it's truly nonsense of a sick mind. Unfortunately, West is aiding it. They're streamlining it further on, and could actually show an example that these are lies. First, not a single of the scenarios that was mentioned Kiev can provide proof for. No documents, no witness statements, nada. Last names of victims or the minors that have been stolen, they have nothing about that. And secondly, we have instrument of solving any arising issues. They have actual factual information. But that actually doesn't go side by side with what the Kiev regime is trying to present. And they were already cold. They were already caught by hand. Do you remember the so-called ombudsman? She was lying about the sexual crimes of the Russian soldiers. And she did that in order to ensure the international support for the Kiev regime. Those are her words. So that's why they're trying to make up new fake narratives. That's why they're trying to get financial support. That's why they continue to terrorize the European continent. They need to excuse their actions. This is why these horrible insinuations appear. And all this is systematic. Those are not just singular sick fantasies. No, this is systematic work. Russian investigative agencies track all the facts of horrible bandit actions of the Kiev regime and their armed forces. All those guilty of the crimes will pay responsibly based on evidence and not the propaganda. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is the RIA Novosti with us? Yes. Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. Christina Rodriguez, the RIA News. If you allow, we have two questions today. First, starting on March 27th, Russia has spread the limitations for the car carriers from countries that have introduced sanctions against our country, including Moldova. The Moldovan government referred to it as an economic strike and proof of negative approach of Moscow. How could you comment on that? And then that's the first question. I will ask the second one later. You see, this question that was posed by the Moldovan press service, I believe you're quoting them. Yes. You see, it's absolutely putting backwards the cause and the action. In February 2022, the Moldovan authorities stated full solidarity with the Kiev regime, and since then, they are leading a destructive course on rupturing the centuries-long history of Russian-Moldovan relations. How it's being presented. The official dialogue has been limited by Chisinau. So it's only reserved to calling on ambassadors. All the bilateral issues have been stopped by the Moldovan side. In the strategy of national security that was adopted in December 2023 and the strategy of defense of 2024, Russia is referred to as a dangerous, constant threat to democracy, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of the country. Another moment, official Chisinau is using limiting measures of West towards our country, as for the re-exportation of Russian goods, banking operations, any limitations of air and rail communications. In November 2023, they have joined the European sanctions that have been imposed since 2014. And in 2023, they finally felt to introduce these sanctions against Russian citizens. As for due to the actions that undermine the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of Ukraine. And overall, Chisinau supported around 80% restrictions introduced by the European Union against our country, and this is striking their own citizens. In July 2023, they have limited the number of personnel of Russian foreign agencies in Moldova, and the ambassador of Russia is subject to discrimination. And that's not the full list of what the Moldovan authorities are doing, but despite all this, the Russian side tried to stay back from any mass-scale responsive measures because it could actually hit a strike on the Moldovan citizens, Moldovan business community, economic agents interested in supporting and developing constructive relations of friendly neighborhoodness. But there is a limit to everything, and it's important to understand the following, that the aforementioned limitations mean that any shipments should be delivered to the Russian border terminals, and after that, they should be transferred to the Russian car carriers to further transport them into Russia. So Moldovan operators have no limitations on reaching any agreement with their Russian counterparts. That's how the situation actually is. And if you allow the second question. Thank you. Anything is allowed. Thank you. The decision of the French court towards Madame Le Pen in order to prohibit her from taking part in elections for 5 years caused a great resonance both in France and the international level. They see it as an effort of French authorities to get rid of the main political competitor ahead of the presidential elections in 2027. Can you comment on that? I believe everyone has already commented on it. It's hard to come up with something new. Of course, the main thread in statements, whether it's in France, in other countries, in our country, this is the murder of democracy. The words of the president of the party, National Unity, Jordan Bardella, he has stated it as such, that with the sentence of Marine Le Pen, they've also punished the French democracy itself. We try not to comment on the internal political affairs of other countries, unlike France. But since you have this question in France, repeatedly commented on our internal policy. Why not use this chance? And I believe in the current international situation, we cannot turn a blind eye to what is happening in one of the leading European countries that is leading the anti-Russian camp in the West. We get the impression that the leading circles in Europe trying to turn the European Union in this military bloc that is aimed to directly confront Russia is rigidly trying to cleanse their own political space. And Marine Le Pen is just one of the parts of this long chain of political repressions of the last months. And not just the last months. Just think of the attempt of life of the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico, on the pressure of the opposition in Germany, on the non-ceremonial cancellation of the results of presidential elections in Romania, as well as the arrest of the head of Gagauzia, Evgenia Guzul. They're trying to cleanse their political space. So any politicians that are inconvenient, they're trying to double-check them. They're making up criminal cases. As for France, I'm not just talking about the recent months, but over the last decades, we've witnessed this already. Leading politicians who have a chance at getting a leading post suddenly have legal problems. They're just being written off from the political life. They're being removed from the political race. Alain Juppé, François Fillon, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, Nicolas Sarkozy, those are actual examples. So we operate on the fact that the appealing judicial bodies of France will respond accordingly. On our side, we would like to advise the French leadership next time when they want to criticize any country about political liberties. Perhaps they should take care of their own issues, because they sure have enough of those. Thank you very much. Thank you. First channel of Moldova. First channel of Moldova, the counter news. As you know, recently 3 Russian diplomats have been sent out by Moldova, among them the head of the Russian delegation, the co-president of the United Control Committee, and of course the Prudnistrian settlement is going through a difficult moment right now. But I would like to ask you, how will this measure reflect on the settling of this issue? Because a lot is being said on what is happening there, what could happen. You see baseless claims of Moldovan officials of these so-called malicious efforts of Moscow to destabilize the situation, unfortunately are becoming a common thing. And now the scandal around the Russian embassy in Chisinau that is being blown out of proportion. Mass media is speculating on it. They're trying to take images out of context. So the video clipping that they're doing, let them show. We will see how many cars of special services of Moldova under Sandu is trying to follow the embassy, trying to follow Russian diplomats, Russian citizens. Let them show it all. If they're so hard at work, at least we will know what are they doing, what they dare to do. Because nobody cares for the clipping of the videos that they're doing. Perhaps it's a thing of previous centuries. There someone would be amazed by it, but please let them post anything. We will take a look at everything that they're posting, as well as Russian citizens who are being sent to our embassy, rightfully so, and who are being escorted by the special service representatives, and on what grounds they're following them. It's time to answer to your actions, Sandu.
And of course, the intent to display that Russia is to blame for all the misadventures in Moldova. Why are they doing that? They are trying to put the blame for the situation in Moldova on Russia, and the situation which arose due to the incompetent actions of the current authorities, which are trying to follow Ukraine's path. And this concerns all the areas of life, and the economy, which is in deep crisis, the social and medical health care is degrading. We are already witnessing Moldova being attempts to subject Moldova to Romania. All those characteristics are not our invention. We are only citing Moldovan experts in that regard. The authorities in Chisinau are conducting outright repressions against the independent, primarily Russian-speaking media. They are eliminating the opposition regardless of their ethnicity. They are hammering all those who are countering the Sandu regime. And the telling example of this is a prominent case with the arrest and detention of the lawfully elected head of the state of Gagauzia, Eugenia Gudsul. Everyone understands that they could be next if they counter the current policy of Moldova. You correctly mentioned that one of the non grata diplomats is a co-chair of the Russian United Joint Control Commission, a mechanism managing the peacekeeping operations in Dniester. This unique format of a peacekeeping tripartite operation in the region is the target now by the Moldovan authorities. We would like to underline once again that the Russian embassy in Chisinau is strictly following the provisions of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations of 1961, and we expect that Chisinau will find the strength to draw reasonable conclusions. Attempts to accuse us of interference into internal affairs of Moldova are baseless. They are all part of the anti-Russian policy course of the official Chisinau and intend to completely demolish the deep historical ties of the Russian-Moldovan relationship. The damage the Sandu administration is affecting upon its own country is immense. We are receptive to the opinion of majority of Moldovan citizens to normalize the relations and dialogue with our country. We are completely open to that. I would like to reiterate that we've been helping them. We will continue to do that. We will help Russian citizens to protect their rights and their lawful interests. This is enshrined in our documents under Costa, Serbia's cooperation with the EU regarding the defense industry. Serbia and Hungary have just signed an agreement on military cooperation. What is the Russian opinion of that? I'll read my second question after that. Well, you know, I would like to remind everyone, perhaps somebody doesn't know, but the European Union is sinking. The economy, the politics, the industry, the manufacturing, the production, everything is sinking. It's obvious. Why then join this sinking ship only to sink with it? It's defies belief. It's all based on text. What defense potential and defense industry potential are we seeing in the European Union? We see some sporadic and hysterical claims around some nuclear umbrellas or some Messiah-like attitude, but in reality, even with the local Ukrainian crisis, we see the situation where they couldn't do anything. And when it was starting this crisis, and when we needed political and diplomatic efforts and not weapons, even then the European Union failed its mission. What do they think? If they can't resolve issues by policy and by politics and diplomacy, they would be able to do that with new weaponry or some defense concepts? Of course not. And all those that have been offered by the European Union initiatives of such cooperation should treat it with a real understanding of the state of affairs. The situation in the economy in the European Union is clear to children even. The news from Washington this night have become another useful information for the, in addition to the existing data that tempos of the economic growth and GDP growth will be failed. They will not match the estimates of the EU issued by a couple of years ago. Just stakeholders need to understand what they are joining. They need to join cooperative efforts with the thought out schemes and production plans, and the other thing is to join in board the sinking ship. But of course, it's their own business who to join and with whom to associate. But there are some obvious things that have been confirmed by numerous facts, of course. You said you had one more question. We have another question. The EU Commissioner on the issues of the enlargement, Marta Kos, has claimed that she doesn't agree with the Alexander Volin being included in the next Serbian government due to his close ties to Russia. What message Moscow wants to send to Brussels and Belgrade in that regard? We see outright and uncouth interference into internal affairs of states in the statements of European bureaucrats. We understand that only the Serbian people can make decisions regarding the fate of their own country, and the government has a responsibility before their electorate. The Brussels functionaries have no legal right or no moral right to point to states which policy they should conduct. Is Anadolu with us? Yes, good afternoon. Anadolu Information Agencies, we have one question. Take into account the recent statement of the Minister of Defense of Israel, Israel Katz, on Israel's detention not to allow the Palestinian administration to control the West Bank. What could be the possible ramification of this stance for the peace process between Israel and Palestine? How does Russia evaluate such statements in the context of the efforts of the international community to reach sustainable settlement of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? You see, recently we heard some statements of Israeli politicians regarding the situation, and our position that the Middle Eastern conflict should be led to a peaceful vein. We need a complete stop to military conflict and the established links between Palestinians and Israelis in accordance to the international legal framework based on the formula of two-state solution and borders of 1967 and the independent state of Palestine with the capital in East Jerusalem. There should be an administrative integrity between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and for these goals our state is supporting the permanent dialogue with the Palestine National Authority and the Palestinian political movements, Israel and other stakeholders. We are calling on sides to reach a sustainable political decision of this protracted political conflict. We insist on an immediate cessation of hostilities in Gaza and the freeing of all hostages. We hope for fruitful cooperation to reach Palestinian unity. We think that the implementation of the right of Palestinian people to have their own independent state will become a guarantee of security in the entirety of the Middle East. The history of the region shows that attempts to resolve the conflicts by force and ensuring the security at the expense of security of others is wrought with further destabilization of the situation. So that's why the stabilization of regional and global cooperation and mediation is required to relaunch Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. We support the diplomatic efforts of the Arab and the Muslim countries to normalize the situation in Gaza, including the prospective plan of reconstruction prepared by the Arab League and the OIC, we are committed to cooperation with international stakeholders to ensure sustainable Middle Eastern settlement. We support the operationalization of the work of the UN, which should become a mediator in this conflict. Thank you very much. Is author E with us today? Yes, good afternoon. I would like to support you for support of our compatriots, our associate anti-fascists who are being detained in the Baltic states. Our question is the following. The EU is trying to reinforce its influence in the states of Central Asia. Is this turn of the former USSR Republic towards the Brussels countries possible, taking into account the results of the summit in Samarkand? I would like to just reiterate my previous statement that the European Union can't but try to entice someone with something without actually having the capability to provide any meaningful incentive. They have their own problems that have been accumulating like a snowball, like an avalanche. I'm convinced that the wisdom of our neighbors and our closest allies, partners, friends that you are talking about will protect them from those temptations to trust those who have been fooling everyone for the longest time. And my second question, that on the 24th of March, President Trump introduced 25% tariffs against the countries that have been buying LNG and oil from Venezuela, all the while accusing Caracas of discreetly sending criminals to the United States. What is the Russian Federation's stance regarding those unilateral sanctions introduced by the United States against Venezuela? I would be able to comment on that a bit later. We will be responding to you personally. Is Vestia with us? Good afternoon, Izvestia TV channel. We have one question. The President of Finland, Alexander Stubb, called on the compatriots to morally prepare for the resumption of ties with Russia. How would you relate the statement? Is Moscow ready to restore relations against the backdrop of the constant unfriendly actions on the part of Helsinki? In the recent years, in recent 2 years, we've been hearing completely different information from the very same people. Of course, I can only deplore the situation with the citizens of Finland who were subjected to manipulation and lies. They weren't even asked whether they wanted to join NATO. They were just included into that process. How much potential was lost as a result of that when it comes to mutually beneficial cooperation with our country? The partnership that has been fostered for decades. When we hear statements regarding the fact that somebody intended to resume and restore relations with us, discussing time frames, not being able to determine the time frames, perhaps questioning the reasons behind that, and as President Putin recently reminded that a tango dance requires two partners. So for this dance to be successful, to happen, the willingness should be shared by both parties. And I would like to repeat once again, obviously Russia is always ready to build normal and friendly relations with other countries based on mutual respect, equality, and consideration of each other's interests. And we are always, I once again would like to reiterate that, we are ready to normalize relations with those countries that we have a crisis, not due to our fault, of course, given that it is the sincere desire and that there is a sincere understanding that they actually had a very aggressive Russophobic position and provided that dependence, that they understand what they've done. And the leadership of our country, the president, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, have been saying that for numerous times. And now let's look at the position of the Finnish leadership. We cannot say that they are sincere. They are not intending to have peace, good neighborliness, and mutual understanding. We remember the bellicose statements of Mr. Stubb, saying that the Russian authorities could understand only the language of force. In his numerous statements regarding his intention to support Ukraine for as long as it is worth, and how long as it is required. And also that there have been numerous Finnish mercenaries traveling to Ukraine to kill Russians. Now they are calling to prepare morally to restore relations with Russia. You know, it is such an inconsequential type of thinking, and we can't really be bothered to guess what is behind those intentions. Perhaps this call was directed to some radical members of this Finnish society that were completely indoctrinated and fooled. But perhaps those statements should be accompanied by the appropriation of blame and some actions. For example, stopping and pumping Finland's information space with anti-Russian narratives and reopening the Russian-Finnish land border to force the construction of defensive structures, lifting the ban on the vehicular or ferrovial transit between the countries, reevaluation of the aggressive military planning against our country. The list could go on. And the official hasn't agreed. The main thing it needs to do is to stop the artificially instilled utopian and destructive, at the same time, ideology of inflicting a strategic defeat upon Russia. For those who want peace and peaceful coexistence, friendship and interaction with us, once again, they can expect our complete and open support, taken into account and given that the country in question makes concrete steps and conducts organized work to remedy the situation. But discussions with the view to determine the time frame to establish relations with us, re-establish and restore, I would like to respond to that our people likes to make their contacts with aggressive foreigners in the spring, in the first or second decade of May. This has been a kind of a tradition of our people. Now, Moscow Post. We have one question today. Could you please comment on the plans of Poland to investigate Russian experts dealing with the crash of the Tu-154 in Smolensk? We heard this statement on the 1st of April and thought it was an April Fool's joke, a terrible one at that. But the statement was true and sincere. The head of the investigative group number 1 of the National Prosecutor's Office of Poland, Krzysztof Schwartz, conducting the investigation of the 2010 crash near Smolensk of a plane carrying the Polish president, stated that the 43 Russian experts will be sent affidavits and the notification of the temporary arrest. The criminal prosecution towards Russian was established due to the alleged facts of provision of false information and documents compiled by the Russian specialists. The sorrowful page of our joint history, the air crash of 2010, has become a subject for political speculations in Poland in recent times. The processual step is another attempt to attract attention to this subject on the eve of the 15th anniversary of this tragedy. The legal nihilism in Poland testifies to the politicized topic surrounding this air crash, and we see in this decision another manifestation of Russophobia and desire to gain political points by accusing Russian citizens and implementing some anti-Russian step.
And the death of the Polish delegation 15 years ago. Here in Russia, we understood it as our common pain with the Polish people. Within the unprecedented short time frame, we create all the conditions for effective cooperation of the competent services. So such accusals are not just senseless, they're also quite offensive. Is the Reuters with us? Yes, good afternoon. We have a question. Following the interview of Sergei Ryabkov to the International Life as for Iran, he said that there are more threats and ultimatums for Iran that Russia denounces that could later lead to catastrophic consequences. I would like to ask how Russia views the situation with Iran and the deal, and how this situation that could lead to consequences actually dangerous today. First of all, I'd like to state that the Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov met with representatives of Iran, and the statement was posted on the website during the meeting. Following the result of the Russian, Chinese, Iranian consultations of the highest level in Beijing on March 14th, course to find viable, sustainable negotiation solutions that could help us eliminate Western prejudices and misunderstanding toward the Iranian nuclear program. Understanding the rightful use of Tehran of the peaceful atom energy. Is the Iran Nuances with us, the information agency?
I'd like to ask my question in English. And given Russia's potential role as a mediator between Iran and the United States, how does Moscow view the use of pressure and threats, including the threat of bombing Iran, as well as increasing the sanctions as a means of advancing diplomatic progress? Considering Tehran's recent agreement to indirect talks despite this pressure, what impact do you believe such tactics of pressure can have on the prospects of reaching a mutually agreeable resolution? Has Russia exchanged any views on this with the American side, given that this may have been raised, the issue of Iran's nuclear issue, between the Russian and American officials? Thank you.
We have repeatedly stated that using of Iran's enemies of military power methods in the context of settlement are illegal and unacceptable, and the threats emanating from outside by bombing the nuclear energy infrastructure of Iran, which will inevitably lead to large-scale, inevitable radiology and humanitarian consequences for all the Middle East region and the world as a whole, are unacceptable. We're staying true to the course of finding viable, stable negotiation solutions that will allow to emanate the Western prejudices and the misunderstandings of the Iranian nuclear program in their use of nuclear energy, which emanates from the Iran's participation in international structures. Is the Xinhua with us? Yes. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova, the correspondent of Xinhua. Before asking the question, allow me to say a few words about another thing. At the last briefing, you suggested suggested posting an article, publishing an article of his perfect command of Russian of the correspondent. And not only have we published the article, and we also posted videos, and your words have made a great impression, and they're sincerely glad to witness this multipolar development of relations. So once again, thank you for that. And as for the question, just recently, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China has compared the Chinese-Russian cooperation with a high-speed train, stating, although the views and the weather on the way of this train could change, its direction remains unwavering. And this high speed of its going forward will remain unwavering as well. How could you comment on that? What do you believe is the key to the stable development of our bilateral cooperations? You see, in Russia, we taken great attention to the interview of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China. This was timed to the official visit of the head of the Chinese diplomacy to Russia. The visit was a great success. Among the main topics was the upcoming visit of the head of China to Moscow to the celebratory events to celebrate 80th anniversary of the victory in Great Patriotic War. On April the 1st, he had negotiations with the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He was received in the Kremlin by the President, and at the end of these contexts, once again, they were in very friendly, welcoming atmosphere. We've reconfirmed the unprecedentedly high level of comprehensive partnership and strategic cooperation between Russia and China. Both sides stay committed to the main course to further ensure the friendly neighbor states. We'll continue our work on realizing agreements between the heads of our states on developing a respectful, mutually beneficial dialogue on key issues, and this approach is a sign of commitment of both sides on pursuing national interests when it comes to areas of security and development, which is why there is no need to review it, and there is no such need for it. And neither Moscow nor Beijing will do it if someone forces them to, because supposedly someone does not like our cooperation or they see it in a different light. We understand that those who do not wish us to succeed, they do not want to see this link between Moscow and Beijing. But towards those who don't want to see it happen, they will not amount to anything. We will continue to develop our contacts on any directions, on any tracks. So I believe that this is a nice comparison, a nice metaphor that you've just quoted. We could provide different symbols. There's an opportunity for other Russian mass media to use in more interviews. We will always be happy to hear their point of view, their beautiful imagery that are based on real facts and measures. As for international affairs, the link of Moscow and Beijing is an important stabilizing factor. We will continue to provide our efforts to promote just multipolar world order, to ensure the cooperation of our countries within multipolar organizations in the UN, Security Council, the G20, the BRICS, and the SCO. Is the Ukraine.ru with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Thank you for such a detailed report. On the human rights, I have a question towards that. The human rights defender and the politologist Kirill Molchanov, who has repeatedly stated with an expert assessment in the Ukraine and other Russian mass media, has been arrested in Kiev. He is accused of glorifying the armed aggression of Russian collaborationist action. According to the investigative, he was working for the Federal Security Forces and the intelligence services of Russia. And he was detained in Poland, deported to Ukraine without allowing him to protect himself in the Polish court. How could you comment on these European actions towards a Russian citizen? You see, the Russian embassy in Warsaw was not notified of the authorities of these actions. So supposedly, the person who was crossing the border in Warsaw, moving from Berlin, used his Ukrainian passport, which is why the Polish authorities viewed him as a Ukrainian citizen and provided him to Kiev at the request of the Ukrainian side. So I believe this is what happened. And in this line, I would like to draw your attention that the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has repeatedly warned Russians to alleviate all the risks, to weigh all the risks when planning trips to unfriendly states. It's especially important in situations, as was the case with Kirill Molchanov, because they could fear provocation from the authorities of these states, and of course we will continue to follow this situation. Thank you very much. Is Lenta Dot, are you with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. We have one question. Just a moment. The question is the following. On April the 1st, the Speaker of the Military Forces of Ukraine has put forward a demand on Kiev staying true to agreements for the Black Sea and stated that the condition should be the legal form of this agreement. And before that, the Speaker for Ukraine stated that those negotiations are the non-renewal of the Black Sea Initiative. So how does the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs feel about this? And is there any kind of dialogue towards the renewal of the Black Sea Initiative, which was signed an initiative in July 2022, or perhaps there's a signing of new one that is in the cards? First of all, the statement that you've just witnessed is a weird attempt by Kiev regime to try to abstain from the agreements reached the 24th of March. As for the preparing of a new agreement, we will understand what it is in the work process, not using the old one. We've already commented on this. And I believe that as for the more detailed comment, I will believe we will prepare it later on and send it to you. Thank you. Thank you. Is the Saga Radio with us? Yes. Good afternoon. We have two questions, if you allow. Next month, Russia will celebrate the Day of Victory, the 80th anniversary, and the main part of the progressive humanity will celebrate it. You've recently stated the German approach to surviving Soviet citizens, that only people with Jewish roots get compensation from the state. Is this true? How could you describe this situation? Yes, unfortunately, that's true. Unfortunately, German authorities continue to give humanitarian payments to those who were part of the Leningrad blockade only with Jewish roots. They try to separate people in those more worthy and less worthy. They refuse to accept the blockade of Leningrad and other crimes on the Soviet territory as the genocide of Soviet people. Meanwhile, they continue to make social payments to further SS officials and those who participated in the blockade. This is immoral. This is a shame. And we continue to speak about it when we understand that there are people who are revanchists who would like to go back to the unfinished work after the defeat of Nazism during the years of the Second World War. Supposedly, the German authorities are unable of learning the history lessons, and they refuse to lay the historical responsibility for the atrocious acts that have been committed. And we will continue to defend the historical and human justice, to preserve the memory. And it's not just about material aspects. It's about the lack of morality and about cynically trying to divide people, which is historically true to the Western European nature. Thank you. The second question. It's for the diplomatic scandal between Iceland and Russia. The press service of Iceland has closed their services, and they're accusing Russia for terrorizing the Icelandic diplomatic mission. Are they accusing the federal services of security for disrupting the diplomatic ward? They left the cigarette remains, and an employee who's a vegetarian had meat in her fridge. And their response mentioned that the Russian embassy in Reykjavik, an ambassador was still working there, were surprised to hear of these issues when they were stated. And recently you've mentioned that there have been no complaints, notifications from police, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Is it true? And is the Iceland providing false information? You have such a long question. Yes, it's true. We have not repeated any requests from the Icelandic side about any threats or risks in the security issue towards the embassy of Iceland in Moscow that was closed. No such requests appeared, neither in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs nor to the Russian embassy in Reykjavik. And we've already provided this information. Is News.ru with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharov. News.ru. Mikhail Rosen, we have one question. President of Serbia, Alexander Vucic, stated that Serbs during the years of the Second World War liberated the country themselves from the fascists. According to the president, aid of the Soviet Union was quite limited. Do you believe that the words of the Serbian president are trying to rewrite history? I would like to draw your attention to the fact that you could take his request directly, and when you quote him, you should use the quotation marks because this is a complex issue. And secondly, it's surprising that the president of Serbia did not find the right words, especially in the year when we celebrate the 80th anniversary of the victory, to honor the memory of those who, together with the Red Army, liberated the Yugoslavian land. I would like to recall that about 55,000 soldiers died, including 3,350 when liberating Belgrade. 21,000 soldiers of the Red Army were wounded or disappeared without a trace. A lot of Russian soldiers fought with the Yugoslavian liberating armies, and their losses amounted to about 1,500. I will not judge whether these people, their input, the lives that they've led, their feats, whether they're limited or limitless. They've sacrificed their lives without thinking of any limits, and that's a fact. And I would like to state that